Hi, this is Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we'll be taking another look actually at ASRock's B450M Steel Legend, possibly the greatest micro ATX B450 board that ever existed. Disagree? Keep watching to find out more. Okay, so in today's video we're taking another look at the ASRock B450M Steel Legend. This is the micro ATX version of the other legendary board that is the B450 Steel Legend from ASRock. Now this was a extremely popular motherboard back in the day, around about the kind of circa 2019 era, when B450 was pretty much the cream of the crop. Now a lot of things have changed. Obviously we've got B550 and also we've got B650 coming out very shortly. This is currently being filmed towards the end of September 2022, so we're heading straight into AM5 territory at the moment. But when it comes to AM4, there's been a lot of boards on the market, and this for me has been one of the highlights. ASRock were pretty much getting into their stride with the B450 range, and the Steel Legend, in my opinion, was possibly one of the best boards they've actually made. Almost full stop. The B550 Steel Legend is actually still quite good, although it does have a bit of a price penalty, whereas this, back in the day, you could pick up for somewhere in the region of about £100, and now you can pick them up for somewhere in the region of about £65 to £70, depending where you shop. I actually picked this one up as a Amazon warehouse deal. I'll put some links in the video description. Always check out your Amazon warehouse deals. You can save an absolute ton of money. Quite often there's a 20% off as well on checkout, so you can get even more off. Definitely worth checking out. Obviously, do try and work out one which is actually working and has got all the accessories with it. As you can see later here, we've got all the bits that actually come with the motherboard. So in today's video, we're going to take another deep dive into the motherboard, all the connectivity, options, RAM speeds, all that kind of good stuff. And we're going to take a look at obviously the accessories we get. And then after, we'll kind of reflect a little bit and see where this stands now in 2022, going into 2023 for AM4 users. And maybe for those of you that are actually now getting to the point where you're thinking about flipping systems and maybe looking for cheaper boards to put a system together with. So we'll start off first of all with the packaging. So this was part and parcel of their whole design scheme for this. So we've got a lot of camo print on here, digital camo print, which I really like. Steel Legend, as it says there. Also on the box, this one particularly has support for Ryzen 3000 series out of the box, which was actually a big stumbling block for this particular motherboard. When the Ryzen 3000 series came out, a lot of people were buying this board and its ATX brother, and then trying to put a 3000 series processor on it, and then realizing that this board doesn't have any BIOS flashback, which was one of the biggest problems with this particular era of motherboards. There were very few that actually had BIOS flashback. A lot of the motherboard manufacturers actually had to do re-releases, such as MSI with their Max versions, which integrated newer BIOSes and also flashback buttons. So yeah, that was one of the key things that you had to really look on the motherboard to see if it supported your current processor. Now, as it stands at the moment, this particular board will support up to and including the 5000 series, which are currently out. There are some beta BIOSes as well. The latest BIOS for this is version 4.3, which was sometime in June, I believe, of this year. There is a 4.31, which is the beta version, which has got a few more features, a little bit newer, somewhere around the kind of August time. So they are still making BIOSes for this, even now, 3 years later, and being that B450 is probably going to still be around for a few more years yet, chances are you will see updates, especially for the more popular models such as this one. We do have support for HDMI in here. It's also got a DisplayPort as well. Polychrome sync. So again, this was one of the things that made it stand out slightly more against some of its competition. There weren't that many B450 boards which actually supported 5V addressable RGB. There were quite a lot that supported the regular 12V RGB, but that was starting to be phased out. So to actually see a motherboard which actually supported addressable RGB and had some standard headers on it was somewhat of a rarity, unless you're spending a lot of money on maybe something like the B450 Carbon Wi-Fi, that sort of thing from MSI. There was obviously the Aorus Elite as well from Gigabyte, which did actually have addressable RGB as well. But yeah, it was very scarce in the B450 range. On the back of the box, it goes into some more of the details. So it goes really heavily into the RGB thing. So this is using the Polychrome sync, which I think is actually still in use now. The ASRock implementation of RGB isn't great, to be honest with you. It's a rather clunky interface, but of course you can always use things like Signal RGB or Open RGB if you wanted to. We're doing a video on Signal RGB coming up very shortly, so if you want to find out more about that and how to control your addressable RGB components when perhaps you don't have the right software or your software is just basically junk, then hit the subscribe button and chime notification and be notified of future video releases. So also other things supported, so we've got M.2, PCI Express Gen 3 x4 speed supported, which they class then as Ultra M.2. We've also got some really good audio on these particular boards. So we're using Nichicon caps for the audio. The audio is actually a relatively low-end codec, so it's using the Realtek 892 or 897, depending which version you get. They were basically the same, they just upgraded between the two. So yeah, the audio is actually really good, very low signal noise or sort of distortion, all that kind of stuff. The microphone port is very good as well. So in terms of audio, yeah, they've done really well on this particular motherboard. Also, you've got slightly upgraded VRMs on this. Now, the VRMs aren't the best, and compared with some of the B550 variants, is nowhere near. But in terms of B450 boards, this has a 6+2 VRM setup, which comprises of 6 60-amp chokes, which actually is pretty decent. And in fact, I've managed to run a Ryzen 9 3900 on here. No problems at all, no thermal throttling, and that is just using the standard 3900X cooler as well. So yeah, it does seem to work very, very well. At the time when this board was released, most people would have probably been using something like a Ryzen 5 2600, maybe a 2700, but certainly if you want to use more than that, if you want to add some more cores, 12 cores, 3900X, no problems at all, runs absolutely sweet. Also on the box, let's go into some of the specifications, so I'll give you a close-up of that now so you can see what it's all about, but we'll discuss that further as we go through the rest of it. For those of you that are interested in what actually comes in the box, now normally you'd get obviously your M.2 screws. I've actually attached them to the board already. You get a pair of SATA cables, so that's going to be SATA 3 or 6 gigabit per second or whatever they call it these days. You also get a actually really nice camo print IO shield, which has got the kind of anti-static padding and all that on the back. Very nice addition. Shame it's not a captive one, as it tends to be on more modern ones, but it also tells you what plugs in where. The one thing which we're clearly missing on here is Wi-Fi, and also there is no BIOS flashback button, as I said before, which is a real shame. ASRock, being the kind of strange company they are, they included a postcard, so you could send somebody a Steel Legend postcard if you really wanted to. They also include a DVD with all the drivers, etc. Those are actually quite handy if you've got a slightly older system or you're just not online for some reason. Something else which is something of the past now is the fact that you can actually get two manuals. So one of which is the software setup guide and the other one is your kind of quick install guide. Incredible, we're into this video so far already and we haven't even looked at the board yet. So there it is, this is the B450M Steel Legend from ASRock. I have very fond memories of this board when it first came out. It was one of those boards that a lot of people aspire to, but maybe couldn't always quite afford because it was a little bit higher up the range. It's a really nice looking board. Again, we've got all this nice digital camo print on here. We've got all the nice color characteristics. So we've got the blacks, the grays, the chrome silvers, all that kind of stuff, all mixed in. And this was great because there were a lot of boards back then in 2019, 2018, where we went through a weird period where motherboards tended to be very much color coded, so they'd be generally a black or possibly even a brown PCB, but then depending on the manufacturer, so Gigabyte would have a little bit of orange, MSI would have a splash of red. Yeah, it was a very weird time, so there were some very odd colors. This was one of the few boards that actually stood out as being very kind of neutral, but still a little bit jazzy at the same time. Now, adding to the jazz is the fact that we've got addressable RGB built into the board as well, which is something which ASUS with our ROG boards did do a lot of. So we've got an addressable RGB section up here which lights up, which you're probably seeing for some B-roll, and also around the actual chipset down here, the B450 chipset, there is actually an RGB which goes around the side of there. Something which was really cool actually, which I noticed in my previous video that I did on this, is the fact that if you hook up a addressable RGB to the header on the bottom, you can actually get it so that the signal for the RGB, like Rainbow Puke, you would get it so it would go along the actual cable and then it kind of seemed like it would circle around there, so creating a complete tell. Now that's a really sad thing, but at the time it really did impress me, and it probably still will when we do a build in this, which we will be doing actually. I've got a new case from GameMax, which is their new GameMax Spark, which this is going to go into. We're going to do a really nice build in there and see how that all goes, so don't forget, stay subscribed to see how that goes. Anyway, moving on, let's take a look at the board in more depth. So in the top left-hand corner, we've got a 8-pin EPS connector. Again, something you didn't always see on B450 boards. Quite often they'll just be a standard 4-pin. So clearly, because we've got those 6-phase VRMs, or 4+2, using those 60-amp chokes, you can actually get a little bit more power into the CPU. CPU support up to 105 watts as standard TDP, so that would be the 3950, I believe it was probably the highest at the time when this came out. Possibly maybe the 2700X. I think that might have been the highest one at the time, but anyway, 105 watts. is what it's kind of rated for. Reasonable sized heatsink over the VRM. It is a little bit misleading because this bit here kind of does look like it tails into it, but it isn't. It's a separate piece. So we've got a chunk of metal there, chunk of metal there, and this is a plastic overlay. So yeah, the heatsink isn't as good as it actually looks like it might be. Moving across, so we've got this heatsink here over the secondary part of the VRM. We've got 2 headers here for fans. There are actually a total of 5 headers on this board altogether, so 4 plus 1. So you've got your CPU header in here. Also, there's a fan header, another 2 down there, and you've got 1 there. So 2, 4, 5 altogether, for those that are not keeping up. Then you've got your memory slots over this side, so 4 memory slots. Now the memory slots on B450 is always one of those weird things where you're not always guaranteed what you're going to get. So if you're maybe thinking about this board, maybe getting a Ryzen 5 3600 perhaps, making a relatively mid-range system, and you're going to get some DDR4 3600, it's unlikely to work straight away. You may have to do some tweaking, maybe increase the voltage. Due to the way that the actual interconnects go from the actual RAM slots to the processor itself, just the signal degradation isn't there for the higher frequencies. DDR4 3200 is pretty much the sweet spot for B450 chipsets, along with obviously the 2000 series Ryzen processors, is pretty much what these were designed for. Potentially you can get faster speeds out of this, and in fact in the BIOS you can get it up to somewhere around the 4000 megahertz range. Clearly your mileage will vary depending on what you put in here. Also, something else to look at is how many slots you're using. So if you're using only 2 slots, you're likely to get higher frequency than you would if you got all 4 populated. Again, because of the kind of noise and the interconnects between the RAM slots and the CPU. Anyway, you get the general idea. So moving down, 24-pin power connector in the normal place, no problems there. There's actually at the top, I just missed that actually, there is a regular 12-volt RGB in there, not addressable, just standard RGB. This would have normally been used, so if you're using the AMD stock cooler, the one with the RGB, the Wraith Prism, then you plug in the header for that actually up on there if you're not using the USB version. Moving back down, so we've got a USB 3 front panel connector there, so that's going to give you 2 ports in there. That's going to be well, the motherboard manual would have said it was a USB 3.1 Gen 2, but it's actually a 3.2 Gen 1 because of how they changed it around. So that is going to be 5 gigabit per second transfer speeds on those. North bridge or South bridge or chipset, whatever you want to call it, that is there. Got 4 SATA ports on here. If for some reason you're using the lower M.2 slot, which is this one here, SATA 3 will be disabled. So if you have a drive plugged in SATA 3 port and then you decide to put an M.2 in there, then one of them is going to stop working. So just bear that in mind. So you're still going to have 3 SATA ports plus your 2 M.2, so that's enough for most people, but just wanted you to be aware of it. Obviously in the center we've got the AM4 socket, support for processors up to and including technically the 5950X, but I probably wouldn't. You're going to be leaving a little bit of performance on the table because of the somewhat weak VRMs for that type of processor, and also limitations for the chipset, bandwidth, etc, etc. But yeah, you could do if you wanted to. Moving back down, so M.2 slot here. So this is going to be for SATA M.2 style drives, not PCI Express ones. So if you want to use PCI Express drives, you're going to end up putting those on your Ultra M.2 at the top here. That's going to be PCI Express Gen 3 times 4 maximum speeds. You can put a Gen 4 drive on there if you want to. Just make sure you set it in the BIOS so that it says it's Gen 3. You'll get reduced speeds, etc, etc. But yeah, you get the general idea there. So fan header over there, like we said before. PCI Express Gen 2 times 1 slot there. PCI Express Gen 3 times 16 graphics slot. Again, if you want to use a Gen 4 graphics card, go into the BIOS, change it from being auto, set it to being Gen 3. You'll get much better performance, and that should avoid things like no boot situations or black screens when you turn the computer on. Because of the way that the PCI Express Gen 4 signaling works, it doesn't always compete well or work well with Gen 3 boards, which was basically why they removed Gen 4 support from B450 at that very early age when we thought we might get PCI Express Gen 4. Technically the boards could do it, but if they're not made it's such a high quality, then you may have issues with it. So that is why they removed it. Underneath that, we've got our BIOS battery, another PCI Express Gen 2 times 16 size slot, although it's only wired for times 4, I think, on this one, but it does support Crossfire, should you, for some bizarre reason, want to use Crossfire in this day and age, but yeah, it is an option. Moving down, we've got our front panel connections, so at the front there, so there's your main system I/O, power button, reset switch, all that kind of stuff. Next to that, there is additional connectors for a system speaker or a 3-pin power LED, which is a little bit old school now, but it is on there. Next to that, there's a chassis open, or CI connector, I think they call it. Chassis intrusion, I think is probably what it's known as. So you could connect up a chassis to there, so it would tell the administrators if the PC had been opened. Next to that, we've got 2 of our fan headers. All the fan headers support PWM or voltage DC or water pumps, whatever you want to connect them to. The software actually isn't too bad when you go into the ASUS system management software, which you can download and install. Yeah, you can control the fans. Relatively good granular control over the fans as well. Next up, there's a pair of USB 2.0 headers, so each one of those will support 2 ports. Then moving across from that, we've got a COM port header, old-fashioned COM ports. Next up, TPM, so if you wanted to use a TPM header, you can do on there. Next up, we've got a 12-volt RGB, and next up, we've got our 5-volt addressable RGB. That's the one we've been waiting for. And then next to that, we've got our front panel audio connector for the Realtek onboard audio. Again, that's going to be the RTL 892 and 897 chipset, depending on when it was produced, and supported with those lovely Nishikon capacitors. So I think that's pretty much it for everything on this side of the board. So let's take a look at our rear I/O. So the rear I/O is actually not too bad considering the time that this was actually produced and manufactured. So we've got a pair of USB 2.0 ports there with a combo PS2 port, keyboard or mouse you can use on there. Something which was being phased out and is kind of nearly gone, but not quite yet. Next up, we've got a DisplayPort and HDMI. So DisplayPort is going to support DisplayPort 1.2. HDMI is going to be HDMI 1.2, I believe, or 1.4. So you're looking at HDMI 4K 24 Hz maximum. The DisplayPort is going to do 4K 30 Hz. So not ideal really for onboard graphics. You would ideally want 60 Hz if you want, but if you reduce your resolution down to like 1440p or 1080, it's going to be absolutely fine. Going to get you 60 Hz and above, so that's no problem there. Next up, we've got 4 USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports. That's 5 gigabit per second transfers, 4 of those. Next up, we've got our USB 3.2 Gen 2, so that's 10 gigabit per second ports. So we've got a Type A and a Type C. Above that, we've got the trusty old Realtek 81111 gigabit Ethernet and also 10100. And then next up, we've got our audio output jacks, so standard 5 jacks, all color coded, which is nice to see. And also there is an optical SpeedIF if you want to use it in some sort of media center or connect it to some form of amplifier. So there you go, that has been a tour of the ASRock B450M Steel Legend. I still think this is a great board. It does look stunning, pretty much every angle. It just looks really cool. I love the design of this. Something else actually which is pretty cool, which ASRock did do, and it's less and less common these days, but it's actually very handy, is the fact that the BIOS chip actually has the BIOS revision stamped on it from the factory. So there's a little sticker on there. This one says P2.70. So when it came out of the factory as brand new, that was the BIOS revision it had. So at a glance, you go to the website, what does that support? Oh great, it supports 3000 series chips. Excellent, no problem at all. And also the actual legs of the BIOS chip are accessible. So if for some reason you did try and do some sort of BIOS flash and you had a power outage or whatever, you could actually desolder the chip, reprogram it, or just buy another one off of eBay or Amazon or something. Quite often, if you go to look on eBay now, search for ASRock BIOS chip, there's tons of them you can buy. So if you want to, you can recover a BIOS in that way, which is a very rare thing these days to actually even find the BIOS chip on the motherboard, let alone get pretty good access and actually know which version it is. So that is cool. Something else actually, which is a very weird version of this, which you may or may not have seen, there is for the Asian markets, there's actually a pink version of this as well. And if you go to update the BIOS or get drivers, then when you go to the website, it will say which version. So there is the standard version, this one, and there's also the pink version. The pink version, I was thinking maybe it's got a pink label on the actual BIOS chip or something, but no, it is actually physically pink. So the plastic here is pink, and also the metal parts, the anodized bits, are anodized pink. So if you're looking for a pink version of this, it certainly is available, although you may have to get it posted from the Asia region to get hold of one. So overall, yeah, a great board. It does have its limitations. Let's be real. You're not going to get a board which supports all the latest and greatest features for every single one of the AM4 processors on the market for somewhere in the region of about 70 to 80 pounds. It's just not going to happen unless you go for a very low end kind of B550, but then you're still going to get issues where maybe the 2400G doesn't work, or the 2200G. Some of those G series processors are going to be a bit problematic because of the way the B550 chipset works. But overall, I think for most people, mid-range systems, anything up to and including something like the Ryzen 5 3600, Ryzen 9 3900 if you wanted to, certainly works fine. I tried it, works. In fact, the Cinebench scores that I got from this were basically the same as what I get from my Asus X570 board. So in terms of people worrying about, am I going to be able to squeeze enough processing power out of 3000 series chips on these boards, I don't think you've got any worries at all, especially with this particular VRM setup. It does seem to work particularly well. But yeah, I really like it. It's a great little board, and I think it's actually stood the test of time. There's a lot of boards which came out similar sort of era, which I probably wouldn't touch with a barge pole now. Possibly things like the B450 Tomahawk, which I get slated for all the time for saying, but I just generally don't like that board. There's a lot of reasons why. It's got great VRM, but other than that, it's a bit of a turd, let's say. Anyway, let's wrap this one up before I say something I actually do regret. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments section below. We'll be doing some follow-up videos on this as well, just to see how well it does fare in terms of performance, and also doing a build in it, like I said. So don't forget to stay subscribed and click on that chime button to be notified of the future video releases. But that's going to wrap this one up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing, Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.